My cousin was a hunter until he uncovered a cursed species that stalks him. I never should have opened that door the moment I did. A chill swept through me. My heart raced. I could feel something deep inside me scream to close it, to run away. But my morbid curiosity kept my feet planted. The air turned heavy, thick as fog, suffocating. Whispers danced all around me, teasing at the edge of my hearing, mocking me. I could almost see them, shadowy figures lurking just beyond the light. My cousin Greg had always been the brave one, the thrill seeker. He would tell us tales of hunting adventures in the woods, of tracks discovered, wild animals tracked. Just last year, we sat around the fire, him boasting about how he faced down a bear. I had laughed then, the firelight flickering in his eyes. That night, he said he felt invincible. No creature could best him. But that was before he stumbled upon something darker. Something ancient. A cursed species, he called it. I remember his eyes that night, how they darted nervously, glinting with a terror that felt all too real. And then came the stories, whispers in the night. Things passed from tree to trembling tree. They said to avoid certain patches of the forest, places where light seemed to abandon the ground entirely. But Greg was headstrong, convinced he could conquer anything that came his way. That I stood in the doorway, the air thickening, carrying a metallic scent like blood. Shadows twisted in corners, and I felt their eyes on me. It was as if all the creatures he'd chased were now standing guard against him. Then came the noises. Cries, distant yet close, muffled and guttural. I was frozen, watching shadows flicker against the wall, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house creaked, and I felt a presence looming. I could practically taste the fear lining my throat, each breath a fight against the dread wrapping around me. Suddenly, a loud crash from down the hall. I jolted, adrenaline coursing through me. Was it the wind? Or was it something else? Another sound followed, heavier this time. Thump, thump, thump. They were coming closer. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to muster the courage to see what was there. Only darkness stared back. The room felt smaller, more confined. It was a pressure that made it hard to breathe. I gripped the doorframe tighter, nails digging into wood. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure. Tall and twisted, barely illuminated by the dying light. My heart sank. It couldn't be. I could feel my limbs go numb, as if I was rooted to the spot. That a scream tore through the silence. But it wasn't me. Nosferatu-like. That figure raised its arm, and I felt the air throb with a sinister promise. Just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, but where to? My mind raced. All I could think was, where was Greg? I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find him. But as I turned back to the darkened hall, the door slammed shut behind me. I was alone, left to confront whatever nightmare awaited me. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The moment the door slammed shut, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Panic surged through my veins like ice water. I pressed my back against the wood, hoping it would somehow absorb my fear. The whispers evolved into a low hum, the walls vibrating with an insidious frequency. They were not just sounds. They were voices calling for someone, something, drawing me further into their cursed web. That I turned slowly, scanning every corner. The darkness seemed to pulse, threatening to swallow me whole. I had to move. The hall stretched before me, an ominous corridor marked by faded wallpaper and peeling patches. A staircase loomed at the end, spiraling into deeper shadows. I had no choice. Greg needed me. As I crept forward, each step elicited a crack beneath my weight, oddly loud in the thick silence. My breaths grew shallow, and the taste of copper lingered on my tongue. That metallic scent was stronger now, mingling with earthiness, like a graveyard after rain. I hesitated but pressed on, feeling the chill curling around my spine. A door stood ajar to my right, slightly swaying, as if something instinctively pulled away from the light. Compelled, I peered inside. It was a small room filled with hunting trophies, deer heads, mounted fish, their glassy eyes staring blankly into nothing. But amongst them was something else, a grotesque tableau. Skulls of creatures I couldn't name crashed together, their jaws frozen in agony. A chill streamed through me. Greg had always been a trophy collector, but the ones he sought were never this sinister. Just as I began to turn away, I caught a glimpse of movement. My heart rattled against my ribcage. In the corner, leaning against the wall, a familiar object gleamed. It was Greg's hunting rifle. I lunged for it, feeling its cold metal fit into my hands like it was meant to be there. My cousin's safety had to come first. I pivoted back towards the hall, and the air grew thick with tension. That's when I heard it, a guttural, cavernous growl that resonated like the belly of a creature awakened from slumber. My limbs turned leaden, heavy with dread. I stumbled backward into the room, holding the rifle like a lifeline. Shadows seemed to come alive, moving with purpose, crawling closer. The growl morphed into a series of howls, echoing through the house, calling out to one another. They were summoning something terrible. My body mobilized on its own, heart racing as I charged out of the trophy room. I couldn't let it catch me. The thumping continued, steady and insistent. Where was Greg? I had to find him. I had to protect him. I sprinted down the hallway, the floorboards groaning beneath the weight of some unseen force. Each step felt like a dare, like summoning whatever darkness prowled in the depths of my worst fears. Then, I rounded a corner, bursting into what appeared to be the living room. It had been torn apart. Furniture lay scattered, cushions ripped open, stuffing like remnants of a gruesome battlefield. In the center of all the chaos was something that stopped me cold, a trail of crimson leading down into the basement door, slightly ajar. The howls intensified, spiraling into a guttural crescendo, and I felt bile rise in my throat. My mind screamed for reason. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to stay back, to turn away. And yet, the call of that crimson trail was almost mesmerizing. Just as I flicked the rifle into position, a loud thud resonated from within the basement, followed by slinking footsteps. The whispers took form, wrapping around me, chafing at the edges of my sanity. There was no escaping it, the horror, the relentless dread. They were waiting for me. As I inched closer to the basement, a frantic explosion of light flooded through the doorway. Someone was in there. It was Greg, his silhouette emerging from the shadows, his face pale as death. His eyes were wide with an ache that felt primal, yet tainted by an unfathomable fear. "Run," he gasped, and before he could say more, the air shattered with a scream, an unholy, penetrating wail that felt like claws scraping against the inside of my skull. And then, from the darkness behind him, I saw it, a monstrous figure, twisted and hunched, eyes glowing an unnatural hue. My vision blurred, and as I raised the rifle, ready to fire, I felt the light within the house snap off as the creature lunged forward. For a heartbeat, everything hung in the balance. Then, as darkness engulfed me, I realized I was no longer in control of my fate. The hunt had begun, and I didn't know if I would ever find my way back. The chill of darkness wrapped around me like a serpent, coiling tight and squeezing the breath from my lungs. I was falling, plunging into an abyss where reality twisted like the gnarled branches of a dead tree. The horrifying scream reverberated in my skull, pounding louder and louder, drowning my senses in its echoing madness. The rifle felt weightless in my grasp, as if it were no more than an illusion. "Run!" Greg's voice clawed at my reverie, spurring me into action. But where to? The monstrous shape shifted closer, its baleful eyes glinting with hunger. I had never seen terror personified until that moment. It was raw and primal, a reflection of every nightmare I had ever known. I turned, my feet screaming in protest against the thundering heartbeat of the house. Then it all went still. The atmosphere thickened, pressing heavily on my shoulders as I stood frozen, caught between two worlds, the one I desperately knew, and the other spiraling deeper into madness. Sweat dripped down my spine as I searched for clarity. Something rustled behind me, and I pivoted just as the basement door slammed shut with a definitive finality, sealing Greg's fate in that unforgiving blackness. Isolation struck like a whip, and panic surged through me. A sound like breaking bones echoed inside my mind, and suddenly the whispers swelled again. A cacophony of voices coughing up dread that I stumbled back, gripping the rifle, every nerve ending ablaze as that creature's growl reverberated through the floorboards beneath my feet. Shadows writhed along the walls, elongating and shrinking, almost as if they had a life of their own. I caught sight of the trophy room again, wretched reminders of Greg's passions. But now they seemed more like sentinels of doom watching over me. A slither of movement caught my eye, like a wraith gliding through the corners of my vision. Was it real, or a trick of the malevolent shadows? I squinted, willing my racing heart to slow, just long enough to gather myself. But I knew. I couldn't linger. The creature wouldn't grant me that chance. Hearts hammering like distant drums, I bolted back down the hall, the rifle clenched tightly against my chest. The walls seemed to close in with each frantic step, the house warping like a labyrinth of despair. Another crash resonated from the basement. Then silence fell heavier than before, thicker than the shadows. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to drown it out, but the darkness seeped in through my skin, taunting me. My mind raced with memories of Greg's stories, tales of creatures beyond comprehension, living within the dark. Perhaps legends were warnings, the kind I had dismissed while sitting in the safety of the light. Something pulled at me, a thread of curiosity intermingling with horror. Where was my cousin? I could almost feel his presence, a lingering memory that edged closer to despair. I was on the cusp of making a choice, the choices that would either bind us together or leave one of us in eternal darkness. With newfound determination, I darted toward the basement door, gripping the rifle to my chest. My mind screamed for Greg, encouraging him to come forth from the depths of that hellish realm. "I'm coming," I called, hoping he could hear me despite the swirling chaos coiling around my heart. The door creaked open eerily, revealing stair steps that seemed to breathe, exhaling years of whispers coated in ancient dust. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but the siren call of family bound my feet. Each step wrenched anguish from the floor, reverbing through my bones, but I wouldn't turn back. I peered deeper into the basement. A flickering light brushed the edges of the darkness, revealing a cluster of grotesque forms, a multitude of unholy figures, imprisoned in primordial congealments, shambling against the concrete. Amongst them, blood was pooling, Greg's blood spilling life and despair. Suddenly, one of the creatures broke free, a monstrous abomination writhing and lunging toward me, its teeth glistening with malevolence. I raised the rifle instinctively, fingers trembling on the trigger, filled with the weight of fear and rage. But before I could pull it, that unnatural howl pierced the war-ridden walls again, echoing around me, and the shadows split. A source of light exploded from the center, revealing not only the creature but Greg behind the frenzy, bound in ethereal chains, eyes smoldering with unearthly dread. "No, it can't take you to." But as the light flickered, an arm reached out from beyond, grasping at him with claws that extended like dark vines. The bond between us crackled, a bond stretched to its breaking point. "Joe." Greg's voice fractured through the tumult, desperation clinging to his plea. Just as the shadows surged forward, ravenous, time froze like a still frame heralding doom. My heart stopped as the air electrified with tension. I was left without a clear path. Would my next move cement our fate, or tear us apart forever? I could feel the darkness closing in, and all I could muster was a terrified gasp before the ground trembled and the scream of the entity burst through the barrier of shadows. I moved, but I stumbled, and as I fell, I realized I was no longer sure what was real or who would survive the hunt that awaited. I hit the ground hard, the impact reverberating through my body as pain blossomed in my palms. The shadows loomed, shifting and swirling, an endless maw ready to swallow me whole. Desperation clawed at my throat as I scrambled to recover, casting frantic glances at Greg, his tortured expression seared into my memory. "Joe." His voice was a lifeline, but it felt so far away, fading into the cacophony of whispers and growls that echoed through the dark. The creatures writhed, grotesque figures thrumming with an otherworldly energy, pulling at the air around them like a tempest. I pushed myself up, my heartbeat drumming like thunder in my ears. I had to get to him. I had to save him. But the shadows danced hungrily, taunting me, and the darkness waiting to swallow Greg writhed with fury. I could feel it tightening, constricting around him like thousands of griping hands, ready to drag him into the abyss. The glowing light flickered, illuminating the basement in brief flashes that did little to ease the dread. I raised the rifle, my fingers slick with sweat, but the moment I aimed, a rush of icy air spiraled around me. "No," I shouted, but the words were lost in the swirling chaos. With every ounce of strength, I charged toward the desolation crawling beneath my feet. Greg's chains pulsated with every heartbeat, dark veins snaking across the floor as if trying to bury him deeper into the unholy ground. The monstrous abomination lunged, its foul breath flooding my senses, rancid and acidic. I could see the hunger in its eyes, wild and feral, an abyss reflecting my very soul's terror. "Joe!" The sigils. Greg's pained shout sliced through the chaos, and desperate clarity hit me. He had spoken of them, symbols of protection he had spent years studying, once used to ward off the very horrors that now enveloped us. With the rifle gripped like a talisman, I looked around desperately, attempting to find something, anything, that could help break the chains binding my cousin to this horror. The flickering light revealed the remnants of Greg's research cluttering the basement, manuscripts lost to time, scrawled notes frantically detailing his encounters with things that defied light and reason. He had done this. He had awakened something. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I spotted an amulet, its surface etched with ancient sigils that glowed ominously. I lunged, heart racing, and snatched it from the table just as the creature barreled toward me. My instincts took over, and I held the rifle steady, ready to defend myself. "Joe!" Greg's voice broke again as the chains pulled tighter. "Activate it." The symbols hold it to the darkness. The ground beneath me trembled as the shadows faltered for just a moment. I thrust the amulet toward the swaths of darkness pooling in the corner of the basement, and as the sigils glowed brighter, the energy surged like a wave, splashing alive against the walls. I felt a ripple pass through my body, a jolt of hope flaring in the depths of my despair. The air crackled as the shadows writhed, shrieking in dismay. But just as I felt the tide shifting, the creature lunged, faster than my eyes could track. It seized my arm in a vice-like grip, sharp claws digging into flesh as it pulled me into the very abyss I refused to yield to. The amulet slipped from my fingers, tumbling into the depths of darkness, and in that split second, I recognized the futility of my situation. But the light surged again, unexpectedly fierce, blue flames igniting as the sigil pulsed with life. It erected a barrier between us, a wall of light that held the shadows at bay, but only for a moment. "Please," I screamed, my voice almost lost beneath the chorus of horror erupting around me. "Greg, I need you." And then, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, flickering not with fear, but something darker and unsettling satisfaction. The realization dropped heavily in my stomach, unsettling the very foundation of my sanity. "You don't understand, Joe." His voice was now saturated with the same feral energy that surged within the creature. "They will save us. They can make us stronger." The shift was unbearable, twisting my thoughts into chaos. The hunger in the atmosphere magnified, pulling at my essence, testing my will to resist. The shadows shifted, and suddenly, a sliver of clarity broke through. This had to end here. But just as I steeled myself, preparing to fight against the tide of despair, the basement door burst open with a bone-rattling thrust. From the corridor, figures emerged, pale, wraith-like silhouettes with elongated limbs, their faces obscured. Their voices merged into a symphony of madness that filled the air with intoxicating dread. They swirled around Greg, tongues flickering like flames as they beckoned him to join their ranks. And in that terrible moment, as I watched my cousin begin to fade, one of the figures turned toward me, the shadows of its visage stretching into a grotesque grin that promised unspeakable horrors. "Join us," it whispered, voice slithering through the darkness like an intimate caress, knowing my deepest fears. "Or be devoured." My heart froze, the weight of that choice seeping into my bones. Around me, the walls of the basement constricted, as if the house itself yearned for my soul as it had for Greg's. I was faced with a decision that would echo through eternity, each breath punctuated by the chilling abyss closing in, and as I held my weapon at my side, the tether binding me to the light trembled precariously. Would I join my cousin's fate among the haunted whispers? Or was there still a path untouched by darkness, waiting for me to tread? With my survival hanging by a thread, the world exploded into chaos again, and the screams of the damned converged, drowning out reason, one horrifying choice left to make. The moment hung thick in the air like a stifling fog. My senses were ablaze, torn between the escalating cries of the darkness and the echo of Greg's voice that now seemed to merge with the creature's cacophony. "Join us," they'd sang, their chants twisting through the shadows and burrowing into my psyche. The basement rattled with unfathomable energies, each pulse of the malevolent aura threatening to obliterate my will. Greg's eyes were no longer the vibrant greens I remembered. They were blackened wells of despair and twisted fascination. The pull of the wraith-like figures was relentless, each tug nudging him further into their thrall. The gnawing dread attempted to consume me, squeezing tighter with every heartbeat. I shook my head, willing my voice to return, fighting against the grip of the pulsing darkness. "Greg, fight it. This isn't who you are." The wraiths leaned closer, their whispers a tantalizing allure. "He is one of us now. Renounce this weakling and ascend." I could see his resolve waver, flashes of confusion amidst the growing insatiable hunger that took root within him. The creature that had wrapped its claw around my arm relinquished its hold slightly, intrigued by my words. I seized the moment, changing strategies while a new terror unfurled in my gut. Digging into the depths of my memory, I recalled a passage from one of Greg's frenzied notes about the sigils and their potential to devour the darkness surrounding it. In that dark ink, he wrote of creating a luminous sphere, a prison of light that could contain the malevolence if the right intertwining sigils were invoked. I could either let my despair consume me, or I could channel this horror against itself. The amulet, a faint glow, still lingered under the cobwebs of despair, perhaps the tiniest sliver of hope. I dropped to my knees, clutching my bleeding palms and summoning every ounce of the power I could muster within. Greg's voice faded slightly, overtaken by the insistent calls of the creatures inching him closer to oblivion. I began to chant the words that once belonged to the forgotten tongues of those who had sought to contain this kind of darkness, allowing fragments of their wisdom to meld into my own. The shadows stirred restlessly, recoiling slightly, sensing the shift in the air. "Joe," Greg yelled, his voice breaking. "Stop. You can't fight it." Their offering with newfound determination, I pushed against the suffocating pressure, drenching my sanity. I could feel the sigils from the amulet drawing into my energy, pulling the light like a tether from my very essence. I rose to my feet, gathering a crystal luminous barrier swirling into existence, shimmering in the ghastly gloom, and with it, the basement erupted into terror. "Fools," hissed one of the wraiths, collecting itself like a snake ready to strike. "You think your pitiful light can withstand the darkness we hold?" The energy shifted, spiraling between us. I locked eyes with Greg once more, trying to break through the haze that clouded his mind. "You've beaten them before. Remember, we were stronger together. This isn't you. You're still in there." Suddenly, the shadows pulsated angrily as a sharp, resonant growl ripped the air, shattering the fragile barrier I had created. The hellish creatures surged forward, their forms writhing together in a monstrous amalgamation of teeth and claws, converging on me. "Embrace it," they screamed in unity, and for a brief heartbeat, fear threatened to drag me beneath the tide. I stumbled back, the glow stuttering as despair crept in like a thief. But instead, I pulled every thread of hope. The blinding light exploded, cascading like 1,000 suns, illuminating the dungeon like a day long forgotten. In that radiant burst, I could see Greg encased in chains, the shadows recoiling against the glow. For a brief moment, clarity flickered across his face, overriding the darkness. "Joe, please. The sigils, they're not just barriers. They bring transformation," he cried out, desperate yet still tethered to the otherworldly energy fanatically wrapping around him. And then, like a haunting echo, the overwhelming darkness lunged toward me, its fangs poised to bite. The wraiths, now avenging hordes of penitent souls, screamed in outrage, their forms whipping around me like a tempest. I had released light, but in doing so had awakened an even darker hunger. "No," I roared, and instinctively raised my arm. the concentration pooling at my fingertips. But as I did, a thunderous explosion of dread exploded from the wraith that had taken center stage, a blackened fire igniting within its ghostly form. We will take what is rightfully ours. The ground shook with an earth-shattering force, and as the shadows rose higher, consuming any remaining glimmers of light, I found myself in a spinning vortex, my body tearing apart at the seams, my mind echoing with every scream that had filled the room. And just before the darkness engulfed me entirely, one piercing thought hammered deep within my soul. It was inviting me to join. Then it hit a flash of white, an intense burst illuminating everything before a new silence enveloped my senses like a soft caress. A choice, an awakening, or an end. But the riddle of what lay beyond tore through my heart, and the shadow-esque laughter echoed. Would I succumb to the depths of that darkness or rise against it? In the breath before oblivion took me, I glimpsed Greg, his chains vibrating, and I saw what lies beyond. Something unspeakable, something far worse. My heart thundered, and then ghosts shifted closer. Join us, they beckoned, and I braced for the darkness, for the choice I knew I was now about to make. The echoes of laughter faded into a choking silence that held my heart in an icy grip. I was suspended in the void, glimpsing shadowy figures weaving through the darkness surrounding me. They shimmered and curled, whispering secrets lost in time, but their words felt sharper than daggers as they burrowed into my mind. Joe, a weak, desperate voice called. I could hardly suppress a shudder as I recognized it. It was Greg. The sound of his name echoed through the suffocating expanse, pulling me back into the turmoil of our once happy lives, a disjointed memory veiled in dread. Fight them, Greg. I managed to gasp, the sheer weight of the void pressing down on my chest. The flicker of light began fading, the power I had conjured waning against the strength of an insatiable darkness. My body felt misty, lingering on the edge of existence as if I were a reflection in ephemeral waters. Then I saw it, a medley of tormented souls enveloped in a grotesque waltz, squeezing tighter around Greg. His anguished face, twisted between sanity and temptation, broke through the shadows. You don't understand. They offer me power, a chance to become something greater than I ever was. His eyes glowed with a twisted effulgence, a siren call against my resolve. What power? You're not a hunter. You're their prey, I shouted, each word punctuated with desperate fervor. You promised. We promised here, together, and facing this darkness. In response, the wraiths swirled around him, tendrils of shadow racing through the air like frenzied serpents. He can become something new. Join us, Greg. Reject your past constraints. They hissed, their insidious whispers tangling deeper into the fragile threads of hope weaving through the vortex. Suddenly, from the depths of the gloom, a piercing scream erupted, a shriek filled with pain and sorrow. I struggled, desperately clawing toward Greg, my heart pounding wildly as it throbbed with an unbearable weight of dread. The horror of it all was crystallized in that mournful cry, another soul, trapped and tormented, calling desperately for release. Each cry tore deeper than the last, igniting an outpouring requiem that shook the very fabric of my being. Luminous threads of dread intertwined with my own rising panic. It was becoming harder to breathe amidst the evolving chaos. I dashed forward, willing to shove back against the dark tide, arms outstretched, warmth flickering in my palms. Listen to me. You have to resist. As I spoke Greg's name, grasping at memories we had forged in daylight, I saw clarity flicker like a dying ember across his expression. But it was snuffed out with an electric vengeance when a monstrous figure loomed at the periphery, a colossal phantom, greedier than the rest, its eyes black pits swallowing any vestige of light that dared touch its presence. Foolish mortals, it bellowed, a voice like thunder rolling over jagged stones. Your memories are chains that bind you. Death is but a door, and he will step through it if you do not surrender. I pressed harder against the terror consuming us, recalling the sigils that carved hope into the walls of despair. Commanding my spirit, I began to recite the aged invocations again, drawing the remnants of light swirling in the ether around my fingertips. Together, we can expel them. I urged Greg, my conviction mingling with fear. Let this be our weapon. But just when I thought I saw a guard drop, the monstrous wraith lunged forward, gathering momentum in an agonizing sprint, tendrils lashing around Greg. The contrast of both my light and the grotesque darkness churned into a tempest. With one arm, I desperately reached for the shadows laved across Greg's frame, the other gripped tightly to the echoing threads of hope I had woven earlier. "No!" he screamed, the sound raw and visceral as he fought against it, but was ensnared as shadows draped over his shoulders. "Joe!" In that moment, clarity ricocheted in my mind. The chains Greg's shackles were long enough to tether us together, and I wouldn't let him fall alone. I stepped forward, heart racing, moving deeper into that treacherous abyss. My body prickled with fear, but I wouldn't let the darkness tear us apart. The whispers escalated, now a deafening roar. Just as I reached the tip of the shadows claiming Greg, the entire basement quaked violently, a cacophony of despair and hunger culminating into a heart-stopping crescendo. The cavernous room itself twisted, warping around us, and through the wall of dark energy, I glimpsed something far worse than I could have imagined. A gaping maw, an unfathomable portal spilling out tendrils weeping with silent screams and distorted faces that stretched wide with malice, hungry for our light. The tortured souls swirling perilously close to that chasm seemed to reach for me, each wail resonating with fractured hope. "Joe, make the choice now," Greg cried, wild desperation seeping through his words. With a jolt, I understood. We were not merely prisoners. We were a part of this horrific cycle, and the entity that had unshackled itself from the abyss aimed to consume us. The maw pulsed, alive with a sentient hunger, and as it drew nearer, I understood that any flicker of my burgeoning light could illuminate the path for Greg, or surrender to the encroaching darkness. The shadows roared back, treacherous and ready to seize their prize. I inhaled sharply, the weight of impossible choices pressing down, and at that moment, the darkness opened wide, and I felt the seductive pull of their call, a mesmerizing, spine-chilling invitation to become one with the abyss. "Joe, fight it. Choose." In an explosion of chaos, my world splintered, terror and temptation entwined. I had to decide in that laughably brief moment. Would we ascend, or would we plunge into the depths of the shadows forever? Then, as if time halted around me, a chilling realization pierced through the turmoil. I wasn't just fighting for Greg. I was struggling against the very nature of what was waiting, an insatiable evil yearning for a new soul to dominate. And suddenly, from the wrap of shadows, I heard one final echoing cry, "Join us." But this time, it wasn't just from the wraiths. It was Greg's voice, twisted and eager as he lunged forward. "No," I screamed, reaching out for him. But the darkness surged around him like an impenetrable wall, and I realized in horror that I might lose my cousin forever. As I stretched my hand forward, the world spun violently. But this time, I was not overwhelmed by gloom. I was swallowed by a consuming light that erupted from within me, a last desperate stand against the void. But even as I lashed out, I felt the shadows ripple with anticipation. The weight of doom encased everything, leaving me breathless in its wake. And then, just before I could grasp Greg's hand, the portal yawned wider behind me, and the abyss beckoned with a final throaty echo, jagged teeth aglow. Everything went blank. The nothingness enveloped me, a thick, gelatinous haze that filled my lungs with suffocating dread. For an endless moment, I drifted within that liminal space, where time unraveled and thoughts melted into a void of despair. Yet, with each fleeting second, the resounding cries of the tormented souls and Greg's voice echoed like iron chains clanking in the dark. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, color seeped back into my existence. Shadows sprang back into view, swirling frantically, and the echoes solidified into anguished faces, those who had been lost to the darkness. Their expressions twisted in frozen agony, mouths gasping silently, eyes wide and pleading. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, a frantic drum in the chaos, a drum that begged for survival in a theater of horrors. "Joe," Greg's voice lanced through the suffocating nightmares, slicing into my consciousness as sharp as the cold gnawing around me. I blinked, and faintly, I could see him, twisted and writhing against the undulating coils of the shadows. The gaping maw persisted behind me, its ravenous presence lurking, hungry and cruel, as new horrors blossomed in the depths. "No, you can't give in," I shouted, forcing my trembling limbs to move as I clawed through the dense air toward him. But the more I fought, the more the shadows tightened their grip on Greg, who now writhed in a grotesque ballet, caught between desire and despair. With renewed resolve, I summoned remnants of the light. I felt flickering within me the warmth of memories, laughter, and promises made, and flung those tiny sparks toward Greg as if they could pierce the darkness. "Greg, remember who you are. Don't let them take you." But the shadows twisted and screamed, a cacophony that threatened to drown him, claiming his name as a sacrificial offering. "Fool, he is already ours." The colossal wraith bellowed, its voice shaking the entire chamber, resonating with a menace that chilled me to the bone. Tendrils snaked around Greg, and within the depths of the void, I caught a flicker of ravenous eyes peering back at me, a legion of darkness eager for the next soul to consume. "Joe," Greg's voice trembled beneath the weight of despair. "You have to let go. You can't save me. Never. I will save you. You're my cousin, my brother." My voice wavered, a thin thread fraying against the monumental fear gnawing at my resolve. With each step I took forward, shadows lashed back at me, shrieking in anguish as if they wanted to pull me under the weight of despair. In that desperate instant, the darkness around me distorted, revealing the truths I had avoided. Each shadow spun tales of ancient grief, victims ensnared before, souls imprisoned beneath the wraith's chains. Suddenly, visions assaulted me of hunters before us, those who had come seeking power, only to become another echo in a chorus of misery. That a figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette woven from the night, a visage that was once familiar, now grotesque with longing and betrayal. It was my mentor, Elijah, his eyes glinting like candles in a storm, twisted into something pitiful. "Joe," he rasped, voice smooth as velvet, "you have a chance to understand the nature of this gift. Join us. Embrace it before it consumes him. Get away from him." I clenched my fists, igniting flickers of fire that danced in the misty blackness. "I won't let you take him." The shadows hissed, longing for my flames, while the maw behind me pulsated, a heart beating to a rhythm of hunger. Panic clawed at my throat, the chilling realization settling in. I was standing at the precipice of a choice that carried the weight of two destinies. "Greg, you have to fight it. Trust me," I screamed, feeling the entirety of the room holding its breath, watching, waiting. The shadows seemed to waver, flickering like dying embers as the luminescence from my own spirit lit a path through the suffocating depth. Yet Greg's eyes reflected a fragile clarity. He looked at me as if I were his only lifeline. But the weight of the shadows was too immense, and in that desperate moment, the wraiths lunged forward. A tidal wave of darkness rippled, and I felt Greg's energy fracturing under their assault, as if the very threads of his essence were being torn apart, splintering into half-formed shadows. "Join me, Joe. We can be more." Greg's voice broke, desperation melding with the seductive wail of the otherworldly. "We can be powerful." But a sudden flash of clarity pierced through the haze. The truth had dripped into me like poison. This was not my cousin speaking. It was the corruption clawing at his soul, the very shadows that sought to drag him into their merciless embrace. With every ounce of strength, I steeled myself to wrench him free from the monstrous longing. "I choose love over power. You're still here with me, Greg." I lunged forward into the serpentine shadows, feeling an agonizing tug as darkness tried to veer me away, but I pressed through, weaving through the frayed remnants of despair, clinging to Greg. Yet, just as infused light graced his gaze, a tremor echoed through the foundation, displacing reality, dark tendrils surging around as the maw erupted in a deafening roar. The chamber convulsed violently, warping around us like pillars of unspeakable horror. "Joe!" Greg's scream was laced with a cacophony of anguish, and in an instant, the light flickered, and shadows clawed fiercely at Greg's form, snatching hope like a thief in the night. And then, with relentless fury, everything shattered, the air split with a deafening crack, as the maw began sucking everything in, and I watched in sheer disbelief. It wasn't he, just Greg. The walls trembled, shadows writhed, And in that last moment of clarity, I saw the eyes of 1,000 lost souls, countless forms stretching beyond it, all screaming, trying to escape, but locked within a prison of insatiable hunger. I reached out in desperation as Greg was wrenched from my grasp, and the world imploded into a whirlpool of darkness, screams echoing through the void as I lost sight of my cousin, swallowed whole by the insatiable abyss. And just before everything went dark, the last thing I saw was Greg's face, not twisted in pain, but somehow eerily serene. The darkness flickered with a flicker of familiarity, unveiling the terrifying truth in the depths of the shadow. "Joe," he murmured, the shadows embracing him, one more haunting whisper before everything faded into the void. And then I realized as I floated through the darkness, I was not alone. Something sinister had taken notice of me and was watching, waiting for its moment to strike. The cold truth seeped through the fog. This was far from over. As my vision faded into the interminable dark, I was seized with a disorienting awareness. I was not merely drifting in an abyss. No, I was entangled in a web woven of despair, my spirit caught within a nightmare that wasn't designed to release me. The shadows were more than mere presence. They were alive, insidious, and they pulsed with a hunger that had claws scraping against the filaments of my sanity. In the vast emptiness, echoes danced around me like spectral flames, tantalizing glimpses of lost faces fleeing through the night, wailing in terror as they were devoured piece by the insatiable void. Their cries formed a melody of anguish, a chorus that lingered in the marrow of my bones, stirring something deep within, a primal dread that surged like a tidal wave threatening to sweep me under. Suddenly, as though summoned from emptiness, I felt a chill curl around my ankles, serpentine and malicious, drawing me deeper into the heart of this endless night. I gasped, panic igniting as I felt the darkness coil around me, suffocating my cries before they could escape. Straining against the cold tendrils gripping my body, I thrust my arm forward, reaching blindly into the Stygian gloom, searching for anything, a moment of salvation, a remnant of the light I had tried to wield. Then, a voice cut through the darkness, sharp and piercing. "Joe, your turn is next," it taunted, dripping with malice, reverberating from every corner of the void. "Who is there?" I shouted, my voice trembling as it disappeared into the folds of the dark. The immediate feeling of dread intensified, and I could feel the shadows shifting, their form momentarily coalescing into grotesque figures that flickered like flames. They formed into the faces I had seen moments before, Greg among them, mouth opening to scream, without sound, pleading for release from the clutches of suffering. "Stop!" The command burst forth from my lips, but the voice only laughed, a cavernous echo that mocked my despair. The shadows convulsed, distorting in a macabre dance as unseen forces delighted in my terror. "Give in, Joe," the voice coaxed, softer now, the chills sweeping around me like a lover's embrace. "You need only let go to be free. We can become one just like him." Embrace the darkness within. The air thickened as I inhaled, tasting acrid panic rising with each breath. I fought against what felt like the inevitable pull, urging my essence into the flickering remnants of warmth that had buried deep within me. It was a struggle of will, of identities intertwining, battling against the creeping allure of power, a seductive whisper that wrapped around my mind, promising safety if only I relinquished my chains of mortality. "Greg," I murmured, my heart hammering violently. I could feel his spirit lingering, the implications of his fate, thrumming hopes twisted into chains of despair. What had the darkness done to him? What choice had he made that led him into this twisted fate? And could I dare to pursue the same path? As these thoughts suffocated my sanity, suddenly, the shadows stilled, rippling around me in exquisite anticipation. Their fangs glittered in the dim light, and from their depths, shapes began to emerge. Hunted, tortured souls converging toward me, their features gaunt and hollowed, eyes trembling with painful recognition. "Save us!" they cried in unison, their fingers reaching out, desperately clawing at the desolation that tethered them. Each face was heavy with grief, their mouths moving without sound, a silent symphony of agony that twisted the very air. My breath caught, their despair pouring into me like poison, compelling me to feel their anguish, to understand the depths of their despair. Please, Joe, don't let it consume you. Greg's voice broke through the spirals of suffering, grounding me just long enough to see his figure, now shrouded in darkness, but brimming with a flicker of familiarity, a spark of recognition amid chaos. But just when I thought hope flickered to life, another roar echoed from the maw that had once threatened to swallow Greg. The shadows converged with renewed fury, and the piercing wails accelerated, a primal call to arms reverberating through the void. Join us, Joe. The souls cried, their pleas merging into a cacophony that enveloped me. Join us before it is too late. Just then, a violent surge of energy rippled through the darkness as the shadows branched, revealing a spectral gateway, a crevice bubbling with incandescent light, illuminating the macabre forms gathered around me. It pulsed and beckoned me forward with an urgency that felt electric. But just as my instincts screamed to run, the dark tendrils lunged, pulling me back with colossal force so that I was caught between realms. One hand grasping the warmth of lost souls who still believed in hope, the other trapped in the icy grasp of insatiable darkness. Don't listen. You will lose yourself, Greg shouted, voice wavering as shadows yanked him further into their maw, stretching the fragile tether that still bound us. In that fleeting moment of clarity, I knew I had one choice left. With a primal scream, I pierced through the chilling grip of despair, reaching again toward the warmth, toward the flickering whisper of light that promised salvation. And then, just as I felt the shimmering light skimming the edges of my fingertips, the ground trembled beneath me, and with a deafening roar, the darkness lunged, wrapping around my soul as it shrieked my name in 1,000 voices echoed as I slipped, towing dangerously close to the precipice of no return. The maw opened. Wider, a chasm to unfathomable horrors. The last thing I glimpsed was Greg's anguished face vanishing into a swirl of darkness as the light within me dimmed, a thief in the night, snatching my last shred of hope. Then, silence. But as I drifted, suspended in the void, an icy breath brushed my neck, and the thickening dark erupted in laughter, the relentless whispers reminding me I had no hope left, and that my true nightmare had only just begun. In the liminal space between existence and oblivion, I floated, a marionette severed from its strings, yet bound by unseen forces. The silence was oppressively thick and pregnant with tension, each heartbeat reverberating against the eternal hollowness overarching me. Where was I? What had become of my corporeal form? The shadows held no answers. They merely surrounded me, shifting and coiling like mist, whispering threats that brushed past my ears, taunting every semblance of reason. Gradually, the void began to vibrate, pulsing with an ethereal energy that felt both familiar and alien. My heart quickened as a new presence slithered through the darkness, its essence heavy with dread. It was not merely darkness. It was something woven into the fabric of my own fears, a predator that thrived on terror, gnashing teeth just out of sight. Joe, a voice called softly, snaking through the silence like a serpent searching for its prey. It was a voice that danced on the borders of recognition, familiar, yet twisted by malice, a cold mirror held up to self-reproach. Each syllable struck me like ice shards, shards that burrowed deep within my mind. The shadows pulsated in acknowledgement, shifting as if the voice commanded them. "Is that you, Greg?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper as the shadows steadily coalesced around me. "Not Greg," the voice crooned, maleficent in its clarity. "But perhaps the one who put him on that path. You recognized him the first time you watched him hunt, didn't you? Such a thrilling pursuit, wasn't it?" A ripple of fury ignited within me. I had always admired Greg's tenacity, but admiration morphed into guilt as I recalled the moment he had ventured too far into the woods, how he had exchanged the warmth of family for the betrayal of blood when he pursued that cursed beast. Suddenly, a rush of wind sliced through the void, pulling away the shroud of darkness like a curtain, revealing a stage, and horror struck. Ghostly figures hung suspended in the air, their bodies twisted, as though caught in their final agonies. Each tortured visage was a familiar face stretched in despair, pleading silently for release. I recoiled, horror pooling in my gut. I knew them all, victims of Greg's relentless ambition, hunters swallowed by the very creatures they chased. It was a horrifying tableau, the weight of their silent screams squeezing the air from my lungs. "Don't you see, Joe? The voice chuckled with manic glee, threatening to unravel what little sanity remained. You are destined to join them. You crave this hunt just as much as Greg. You cannot escape the cycle of predation. Amidst the tableau of horrors, I felt the icy grip of despair tighten around my heart. The very shadows that wrapped around me now appeared to twitch with sinister anticipation, waiting for me to succumb to the darkness within. I strained against the unseen bonds, searching for the faintest glimmer of hope, a way to break free. The echoes of those who had been lost turned into a sinister melody, their pleas resonating within the blood that coursed through my veins. "Save us!" they wailed, a cacophony that threatened to drown out my thoughts, each cry entwined with the spectral laughter of the unseen predator who reveled in my unraveling. Suddenly, from the heart of the gloom, the shadows contorted, pulling back to unveil a glimmering chasm of pure light, desperate and inviting. It shimmered with the soft glow of promises unfulfilled, the remnants of dreams for those who had failed to grasp their fate. The faces clawed at the edges of the light, aching with desire, their agony brushing against my consciousness like mournful whispers. As I hesitated, the shadows surged, lunging toward me with insatiable hunger. Memories of Greg filled my mind, his laughter, his hopes entwined in a pursuit that had led him here, into the arms of grotesque failure and eternal entrapment. "What are you waiting for?" The sinister voice crooned, slithering into my thoughts, wrapping around my heart with cold fingers. "You can be one of them. You can join this dance for eternity. Embrace it." Amidst the clamor of tortured souls and the beckoning light, I felt myself spiraling toward that fractured beam of hope, knowing all too well it was a siren's song. Surging forward, I reached, fingers brushing against the radiant surface as the shadows howled in fury, their fear of losing me palpable, their grip weakening just long enough for me to slip closer to that blinding beacon. But something sharp dug into my back. A pain lanced through my spine as a dark tendril pierced me, anchoring me back into the suffocating embrace of the void. "We will not let you go." The laughter erupted, echoing harshly in my ears. The lights surged with ferocity as I screamed with realization. A tormented locket of his cursed memory hovered just above, shining with its tainted promise, an object cursed under the blood of my ancestry. It was Greg's death knell, and I was but a heartbeat away from a fate worse than death. With horror spiraling in my chest, I understood everything: the hunt, the darkness, the cycle stretching back generations, pulling its victims into its MAWD. It was my turn now. And that was when my vision fractured. The shadows began to peel away, and I realized with chilling clarity this was only the beginning. I woke up gasping, my body shaking as if I had sprinted through the depths of a nightmare. The air was stagnantly still, heavy with the scent of mildew and a potent metallic tang. My heart raced, every muscle in my body taut with fear. The memories came flooding back in overwhelming waves: the shadows, the howling, Greg, but this time, I was not engulfed in darkness. Instead, I found myself lying in an unfamiliar room, a tattered curtain fluttering weakly against the decay of the walls. Light filtered through the grime, creating ghostly patterns that danced chaotically in my peripheral vision. That I blinked heavily, pushing myself up on my elbows, mind disoriented and confused but alive. For a moment, I allowed hope to race through me, a gentle push against the suffocating reality that had nearly devoured my existence. "Greg," I called hoarsely, the name a desperate plea for salvation, but the silence that followed was suffocating. The echoes of my voice dissolved into nothingness. Panic surged anew, waking every primal instinct. But as I conducted my frantic search for any sign of my cousin, the dreadful memories returned with vengeance, circling like vultures. The realization settled heavy in my mind: Greg was not just lost. He had become something else, something that resided in the very shadows that breathed through this house. I struggled to my feet, feeling the chill radiate from the floor into my bones. Shadows flickered around the edges of the room, daring me to surrender to despair. Mustering all the strength within me, I forced myself to delve deeper into the remnants of my memories. The sigils, the light I had fought so hard, believing there was still a way to save Greg. Hadn't I? But as I remembered his final words of twisting power compared to the warmth of our connection, I felt the certainty of dread slip into my bones. There was no escaping this curse. There was only the hopeless cycle he had warned me about. The old tales whispered in the shadows were true suffering, despair, and betrayal. They echoed through the cursed lineage we shared. I was bound to this cycle, woven into its very fabric, and the horrific truth resounded like a sickening bell tolling within my mind. The darkness was not merely external. It had found a home within my own soul. With trembling hands, I reached for the nearest surface, a nearby table, splintered and laden with the weight of forgotten tragedies. Gripped by an overwhelming instinct to flee, to escape this house, my eyes widened as a familiar intricacy caught the light. A glimmering amulet lay there, its sigils inscribed, yet tarnished and murky with time. Like a fatal magnet pulling me in, I snatched it from its resting place, feeling a surge of resolve that temporarily banished the gnawing fear. I stowed the amulet into my pocket. The shadows writhed violently, coiling around me like serpents. The walls trembled, a low growl reverberating from beyond the threshold, echoing the very heart of my fears. "Join us," the voice hissed, 1,000 dead whispers promising deliverance. "You can be powerful, just like him, like Greg. Free yourself." "No," I shouted defiantly, my spirit igniting against the encroaching darkness. I would not surrender to this hellish charm. I would not become what Greg had become. My choices mattered more than power. They mattered more than survival. If it meant succumbing to the very cycle of despair I had tried to escape. With newfound strength, I stormed toward the door, the outline of light flickering through the cracks, morphing into ethereal fingers beckoning me. As I pressed forward, the air crackled with malevolent energy. The shadows brushed against me, chilling my skin like dying embers, and just as I reached for the door, it swung open violently, revealing a figure cloaked in darkness. It was Greg, but not the person I remembered. This version of him was twisted and hungry, eyes glowing like endless voids, filled with an insatiable appetite for my very essence. "Joe," he murmured, voice sultry yet warped, pulling at my heartstrings. "You can join me. It's too late. For you, too. You are part of this now. We can rule together, become something unimaginable." The offer echoed through the hollow of despair residing deep within me. The warmth from my memories wavered, and shadows clawed at my heart, severing the tether I clung to. "No," I gasped, stepping back instinctively. But the moment I faltered, the air tightened, as if the house itself wanted me to break. It was at that moment I realized my fight had just begun, and what loomed behind my cousin had grown far more sinister than anything I could have imagined. The creatures I had seen before, the souls twisted within the wraiths, had merged, weaving an insatiable hunger through time itself. The shadows pushed forward, whispering their promises, as I stumbled back against the wall, my world fracturing around me. "Stay away," I proclaimed, raising the amulet defiantly between us. Energy surged through me, pouring from the sigils into the feeble light, glimmering as barriers surged into a wall of shimmering defiance. You are not him. This ends now." But Greg merely smiled, mocking, as the shadows around him twisted and bloomed, becoming a terrifying echo of my own worst fears brought to life. "You think you can defeat the darkness within? You merely pray at the altar of hope, Joe. It will consume you. Join us, embrace it, or be devoured." With a surge of fury, I plunged forward, thrusting the amulet towards him, casting out the energy with every fiber of my strength. It erupted in a dazzling burst of light, clashing against the torrent of shadows. Everything around me erupted into chaos, a collision of light and dark battling fiercely for dominance. And then, it happened, the unfathomable. The light coalesced into a sphere that pulsed with life amidst the consuming void, sweeping through the darkness, illuminating familiar faces behind the tortured forms. Each expression mirrored their despair and longing, crying out with unspoken lifetimes of loss. They weren't just echoes anymore. They were memories wrapped in chains, and suddenly, I felt an incredible weight lift, followed by the sobering truth. They were never meant to be bound by darkness. I wasn't he either. "Join us," they screamed, urgency electrifying their pleas as if anticipating another freedom. "We can be whole again." And in that instant of clarity, I understood this wasn't merely a battle against the darkness. It was a chance to heal the rifts that bound us to the cursed cycle. Thinking of Greg, of the memories we shared, I hurled the amulet deeper into the thrumming darkness where it shattered, light spewing everywhere. Faces began converging, recognizing me as a bridge against fate, and as tendrils of light spiraled outward, time itself split, allowing fractured souls to attempt escape from their torment. I felt warmth flooding, realization igniting hope in every despairing heart, wrapping around Greg's outstretched hands as memories flooded back. But he hesitated. Shadows twitched around him, unwilling to release their grip. "Joe," he breathed, haunted yet yearning. "Do you really believe we can be free? Together?" I screamed, the swell of light pulling against the encroaching blackness as Greg hesitated, swaying against the ephemeral waves crashing against him. With every ounce of power, I surged forward, launching my hope, piercing through the veil of darkness between us. And as I felt our hands collide, we plunged into light, shattering chains of despair and consuming darkness that promised power but offered only a prison of anguish. But even as we surged, the voice slithered back, echoing through the chasms of existence, forever entwining despair with the haunting promise of shadows. This isn't the end. The darkness can never be defeated, it only waits for the next hunter. And as light began to envelop everything, layering kindness over the raw horror, I heard its echo from the shadows all around me. They would always linger, waiting, watching, ready to feast once more on those who were drawn by the thrill of the hunt, whispering sweet nothings that promised salvation even as they drew me in like moths to a flame. I had escaped the clutches of the dark only to realize the truth remained hidden, clawing at the recesses of my mind. Each heartbeat brought the shadows closer, an invitation to return to that seductive madness, and even now, as I vowed never to succumb again, a chilling whisper slithered through my heart, a lingering promise sewn in the fabric of my very being. You will hunt again.